Welcome to the Epic Success Podcast. I am your host, Dr. Shannon Irvin. We are continuing in this financial growth series all around the kingdom principles of growing your wealth so that you can impact more people and change the trajectory of your family line and the generations, your children's children, whether you have kids or not, right? So last week, if you did not catch last week's podcast, we'll link to it down below, but it really was the foundational set around creating an environment in which your finances can grow in your business, right? It's just like if you're someone who's ever planted anything, you know that you have to have the environment correct, the right soil, the right weather, the right watering conditions in order for a seed to grow. I mean, you could plant a seed in the ground in rocky soil and no water and really hot sun, and that seed will wither up and die. And I'm using a lot of metaphor here because I think it is I know it's the thing that shifted how I thought about money, how I approached money, how I allowed money and built a belief pathway to it, and how I've expanded money and multiplied money. Because we don't want to just get to a financial flow. We want to get to financial multiplication. And right now we're starting in the series around opening the faucet to the flow. But what I want to get to is how do we truly create kingdom wealth where we aren't just making money for ourselves in our own freedom, but we're actually multiplying our money so that we see others multiply and others grow as well. I think that is our birthright. So it really was a journey for me. I kept planting seeds in soil that was so dry and so crumbly, and then I didn't understand why was the financial gain, why wasn't there a financial gain from that seed? And it's because I kept planting those seeds in ground that would not allow it to grow. And I think hopefully you're starting to see the ground that I'm talking about is your mind. It's, do you have the soil of your mind to grow an open flow of finances? And so we always want the finance, we want to see it to believe it, right? So we want the finances to be in our bank account so that we feel that we can believe it, so then we can actually grow it, right? But that is opposite of the way abundance works. And we talked about last week, so if you didn't get into that, like the whole law of sowing and reaping, whether you're a person of faith or you're not, that is a universal law that works, by the way, on both sides of the equation. If you sow, you reap. And if you sow generously, you reap generously. That is true if you're sowing fear or if you're sowing belief, right? That is true if you're sowing judgment. As you judge generously, you will be judged more generously. As you judge yourself, you will judge yourself more generously. So it works on both sides of the coin. Either you're going to create an environment that allows the seed to grow, or you will continue to create the environment that continues to draw nutrients and growing ability out of the land, making it hard and nearly impossible to make the flow of finances start to open up. So if we know that this law of sowing and reaping is literally at work, whether it be positive or negative, then the next question that brings to mind is, in terms of unlocking financial growth in my business, what do I need to sow? And what do I need in order to grow? Like, what do I need to sow? What seeds do I need to put into the ground? And what do I need to create in terms of the soil of my business, of my life, of my thinking, that will allow the seed to not just take root, but to grow 10, 30, 60, 100 times more than the seed that you planted in the ground. Now think about that. That law of sowing and reaping, you see it all the time, but don't think about it. Farmers sow a tiny little seed into the ground. It goes sow, time, reap, right? We talked about that last time. But that little seed in the right environment becomes a giant apple tree, becomes a giant cherry tree that gives fruit year after year after year if the ground and the environment is set. So why do we think that provision is any different? Why do we think that our getting our crop, which we talk about in terms of money, like, I think the one thing I really want you to understand is money is a test, which can become your testimony, but it's a test. Like how you handle the things of money means how much more money and resource will be given to you. Because if we do not have the ground to handle the seed, no more seeds will be given. But if we have the ground of our mind, if we have the beliefs built, if we have removed some of those weeds like comparison, like judging of others, let's just be real, judging of others when they accomplish it and I haven't yet, all of the thoughts that are literally choking out your seed, right? So in order to sow, you've got to build the environment to grow. That's number one. Number two is we got to unhook from the blocks. The blocks are the things that dry out the ground, that make the ground infertile, that lack of water, lack of sunlight, lack of nutrients. Those blocks come to us in terms of money and abundance, in terms of our belief. Blocks are tied to our beliefs. So we go around searching for new strategies, new tactics, new ways to make money, new marketing, new messaging, new this, new that, new this, new that. By the way, if I had a shelf up here, if you're looking on YouTube or on where you're catching this in video, if I had like a bookshelf up here that had all the marketing and business courses that I bought prior to doing this work, I don't have enough wall space. So I get it. But the great news is now that 15 years ago, I learned how to build belief in the brain. I learned how to remove blocks, the pathways in your brain of the blocks that are holding you back. And that's what, of course, we coach in. That's what we certify our coaches in. It's the only like brain-based transformation system that you can get trained in as a coach, that you can get certified in as a coach. And of course, you've got links down to that in the show notes. You wouldn't want to learn a broken model to coaching. I'm telling you that right now, because coaches need coaches, and transformation creates results, not just this cycle of blame. Some of the methods I see out there coaching to try to change beliefs tells you that you're thinking a thought because you have that result, and so change the thought and it'll change the result. That's not how your brain works. That's just not how your brain works. So in order to unlock belief, we've got to remove those blocks. And the great news is a lot of those blocks to money, blocks around scarcity, blocks around what money means, what money is, what money isn't. I have a client right now, I'll call her Sam, that's not her name, but she had a vision for marketplace ministry, meaning being the very best, getting 6, 7, and 8 figures so that they could sow into the kingdom. But they just felt so guilty that it just seemed like something less than, like ministry was holy, but making money was not. That's a block. Imagine if the only thing God did was make people for ministry, but had no one to fund it. No one would hear the good news. So the blocks, they don't come from your own thinking necessarily. They come from patterns of the past. So patterns of the past, when you were growing up, there's a prefrontal cortex, this you touch your forehead, it's the thinking part. I talked about that last time. It didn't fully develop till you were 21. I'm going to keep telling you this because your subconscious brain that runs 90% of your decisions, and therefore your actions, and therefore your results, are based on subconscious belief. Subconscious belief gets created only by repetition. And here's the thing, when this part of your brain wasn't fully developed, your repetitions are the repetitions of your family of origin, environment of origin. And most people live their whole life and never question why they think what they think. And does that thought create their future or keep them tied to the past? So in order to grow, you have to sow. But in order to believe, you got to unblock. You've got to nearly neutralize and erase those belief patterns in the brain that says money is evil, that money is the root of all things bad, that I can make money, but I can't keep money, that making money is my story was on the backs of good people that make 200,000 or more, on the backs of people who make $200,000 or more, basically are abusive to everybody else and not good. And so I grew up hearing that people who made over 200,000 were bad people, bad people, bad people, bad people. Well, guess what my block was? If I go over 200,000, I didn't think it consciously, but I get to 199,000 in my business and somehow I would sabotage it. Why? Because I had a belief that was a block. And literally taking the hose of the financial flow that was destined for my business in order to multiply the kingdom, in order to grow and change people's lives, in order to make a difference, was literally being kinked and a big old foot was stepped on it. Why? Because my brain was programmed with automations of the past that were literally informing the future. So in order to grow your finances, you've got to sow. And in order to believe, you got to unblock. And the last principle, and I cannot wait till next week, because then we're going to get into the very specific things you need to install in your thinking in order for you to build a pathway toward financial freedom. If these things that we're going to talk about next week do not get installed in the patterns of your mind, then it will be very, very hard to create financial freedom, right? So we're going to dive into that next week. And then the following week, we're going to be talking about what are the blocks that we need to remove. Why? I really feel a call right now from God for you to get the truth about building wealth. Because building wealth is not about you. Now, if you're listening to this and it's all about you and it's all because you want money and you don't want to help anybody and you don't want to make a difference and you don't want to be blessed to be a blessing, then you're not going to love the things I'm going to have to say, because I believe that is our birthright, that we get blessed to be a blessing, not so that we could hold on to it, constrain it, but we've got to build in our mind a pathway toward allowing it. And if we do not, then our brain is literally working against us. All right, I'm going to wrap up this week's podcast with this last thought. So I said to grow, you've got to sow, and the ground has to be great. In order to believe, which allows wealth generation to happen, you got to unblock, right? You've got to remove the patterns of the past that are keeping you chained to it. This last principle is so important, but so unseen. This last principle is a principle that is in action with every 7 and 8 figure business owner I know, including myself. However, I rarely hear it talked about as a principle of abundance, a principle of wealth generation, a principle of financial freedom. So I want to talk about it today because I'm wanting to give you in this series tangible things you can start doing to open the hose to your financial freedom and therefore wealth generation, and neutralize and erase any of the blocks that are literally chaining you back to the past. Okay. So we talked about the big overarching foundation, which is sowing and reaping last week. This week, I want to give you this concept. I'm going to put it in the bucket of generosity, but it's more first versus last. First versus last. Now, those of you who are believers, you're very, you know this conceptually with the idea of giving the first fruits or the beginning part honoring and setting aside the first thing that you do as an offering to God, who gives you the rest of the 90%, all 100%, right? Gives you the talents, gives you the skills, gives you the desire, gives you the dreams, all of that. But what I've noticed is, even if somebody is not a believer, when they start to unkink the hose and create financial freedom and start to give, whether it's giving of time, whether it's being generous with their knowledge or their finances, and especially with their finances, this is where this particular foundational element comes to play. You've heard it's better to give than to receive. This is also connected to sowing and reaping. But as you start to grow, it's what do you do with the money first versus last determines if you will continue to grow and scale or slow and stop. And some of you have experienced that. You've got a hit, you've got a few clients, and then it slows and stops. And you're like, what the heck happened there? And it's because you have an element of scarcity still at work. Don't worry, we'll hit that in the blocks you've got to remove. But the first versus last. So now I'm just going to speak to the believers right now, those who believe in Jesus. There is a command, and I'm going to get really controversial here because I know if you're listening to me, there's going to be some of you that don't believe it, some of that you believe this Old Testament, it's old, I'm saved by grace, yada, yada, yada. All I know is that of all my friends, including myself, that start to give first, they see more abundance. And those who tend to hold and give last when they feel safe and secure tend to stop and slow. And so what I mean by that, if you're a believer, that means bringing your tithe to the storehouse. That means bringing your tithe, your 10%, taking 10 out of the 100%, giving it, sowing it back to the one who created you and gave you all that you have first, not as part of, not at the end, oh, I'll pay everybody first and then but it's really doing that first. Now, if you're not a person of faith, guess what? This still is a thing that is universal across our worlds, meaning the more you sow generously, meaning not expecting something in return. So if you think about it for believers, we sow to God what is his, and we live on the 90%. Right now, I'm living on the 70%. We have a goal to live on the 10% and give 90% away. That's how powerful this principle is. God will say, test me in this. You cannot outgive me. But most people are still so scarce, they're holding on. Okay, now I'm going to talk to everyone now. What does this principle mean? I had to talk to the believers there for a second. And I know I'm going to get all the things. Why? Because we have that mine mentality. It's mine. See, the thing is, currency has the word current in it, meaning it's supposed to flow. You've heard Tony Robbins say it flows in and out and back to me, pressed down to overflowing. That's a scriptural saying. Okay. Why is it important? Because if I constrict it and say mine, then now I have cut off the flow to more. But if I open my hands and I say give, or give it to God, give the first part of it, whether it's maybe to a charity. For me personally, I do believe the 10% goes back to the house of God to be able to do good works amongst the world. And I make sure that the place I do that in is really fiscally responsible. That's my personal belief. You do you, I'll do me. I'm just sharing a principle that first versus last in terms of generosity. Literally, it takes you from holding on like this, which means you cannot get it. If you're just listening to me on audio, I realize I do that a lot because I'm doing video. If you constrict it, if you're holding on with clenched fists, you cannot receive. But as you open your hands, as you're generous, give your first 10%, give of your time, give of your knowledge, give to another person without other people knowing, without sharing it to the world, right? Now we have open hands to receive 30, 60, 100 times more. Why? Why does this principle work, whether you're a believer or not? Because you're being what's called a steward, or somebody who manages this test of money so it can become your testimony, right? This money is supposed to come in, flow through you to others, to allow for space to give you more and more and more and more. But with this block of scarcity, we clench our fists and say, I'll give after I have enough. When we do that, unfortunately, we constrict the flow. And so I'm just really opening up to you guys. I'm wanting to share where I was. By the way, I was doing just that. I don't remember the character that's like my pretty, my precious, like that's where I was. And I couldn't figure out why the flow wasn't going. And God really arrested my heart on this. The more you grow, if you want to grow in your finances and your wealth and your generational shift, you've got to sow. In order to grow, you've got to believe. And the only way to build brain-based belief is, we'll talk more about what beliefs you need to build next week and what you need to remove the week after that, but is you got to come unblocked. And it's not unblocked in the outside strategy world. It's unblocked from the patterns of the past that are keeping you chained to it. And then this last principle, generosity, open hand first versus last. Practice that this week. Where is one way, whether if you're a believer and you go and actually give the 10%, or if you're someone who's like, you know what, I can go sow some information. I can go sow to somebody who's behind me and help them out. I can go sow, and I'm not going to tell anybody about it. This is an area whether you can test and see how much more you're able to hold when you've created the soil. That's part of that soil that I'm talking about, that is so fertile that it cannot help but produce 100 times return to you, and then continue that process of giving so that it's another 100 times and another 100 times. All right, that's what I have for you this week on these principles of wealth generation, so you can unkink the scarcity hose and start to experience abundance. Next week, we're going to dive into the 10 beliefs you must have in order to allow wealth. And then the following week, we're going to hit on what are the blocks you must remove to unkink the hose to allow abundance. All right, I hope this has been helpful for you. If it is, please DM me on Instagram or post it on Instagram and tag me. And of course, I will always let you know that the doors to our coaching certification are open for only a couple more weeks. Make sure you click the link down below, watch the live the training that's there for you, and apply to become certified in the only brain-based 100% transformation model on the marketplace, so that you can create raving fans of your coaching that sell for you. All right, have a wealthy and prosperous week. Until next week, bye for now.